This is a glamorous location, isn't it? Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for joining me because today I'm in the Marlborough Street Magistrates Court. Oh yes, very posh, absolutely. And I wanted to take you in here simply because it has, as ever, a royal connection that may surprise you. Now, this particular court really came into its own and literally is round the corner from the world famous London Palladium. So you can imagine it was kept quite busy for many years. But really, it came into its own, literally, as I say, quite simply because in 1895, Oscar Wilde, the celebrated writer and natural wit, whatever you want to call him, decided to take the Marquess of Queensberry to court for libel. And it was here. And it was here, of course, that Oscar Wilde gave his very famous speech about, what he thought, and he was very witty and decadent, and everybody said, oh, marvellous. But actually, he wasn't really answering the questions, which really angered, as one can imagine, not only the judge, but everybody else. But this made the court very famous. And suddenly, people were queuing up, because of course this was free entertainment, to see such a wonderful raconteur and wit in action. Now, we all know how that ended, of course, sadly for Oscar Wilde. It wasn't exactly his finest moment. Perhaps many people suggested he shouldn't have done that in the first place. But this court really had a lot of history. And as you can see, they've kept all elements of it, including the infamous courtroom. Now, the cells you can sit in and have a little aperitif before dinner and wonder exactly whether it was the likes of Mick Jagger, maybe the Sex Pistols, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and indeed Christine Keeler from the Perfumo scandal that either sat there waiting their fate. Now, as many people know who watch the show on a regular basis, I was lucky enough to meet and interview Christine Keeler on a number of occasions, and she was a wonderful lady, not the sort of character that you think of at all. The downside to her really was that she wasn't necessarily more akin to the world of show business as, say, her counterpart, Mandy Rice Davies, was. But you see, the story goes, and this is where it gets really interesting, the story goes that obviously there was a royal connection to that Perfumo scandal. You see, the man at the centre of it all was Dr. Stephen Ward, physiotherapist, that sort of stuff. And apparently he'd offered his services and had undertaken work with His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. So you can understand how this was a very murky ground way back in the early 1960s. Then it emerged that not only had he undertaken medical work with him, but also sketched the Duke on a number of occasions, inside Buckingham Palace on one of them. So this really created the tabloid storm that literally put this magistrates court on the map. Now, Christine Keeler, when I asked her, and remember, this is a woman who's been in the spotlight since she was 21, and she was well in her 50s at this point. And I said to her, what's the deal? Was he ever really associated? And she said, my lips are sealed. Now, you could take it that one way or another, whichever way you want. The bottom line really was she knew how to create controversy, get people talking about her, and at that point she had yet another book to sell. Christine's life wasn't everything that possibly people thought. I also met Mandy Rice Davies. And Mandy Rice Davies was part of an ill-fated musical put together by Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber. Called simply Stephen Ward. Good idea, but perhaps a little bit past its time. Mandy was there, yes, to help promote the musical, never shy, of course, of landing on some publicity. That didn't necessarily work out, and it wasn't one of Andrew's biggest hits. Again, what's interesting about this court is when you wander around, you kind of think, yes, literally, it all happened here. The Sex Pistols were, brought here, and their manager, Michael McLaren, he knew a thing or two about publicity, did he not? The bigger version of stories of events was he was absolutely thrilled, tipping off all the media, because once again, the bad boys of pop, and this is, remember, way back in the 70s when there were no social media, and of course things really just made the front pages for weeks on end. Well, Johnny Rotten and the boys literally put this on the map. The biggest stories, though, that ended the swinging 60s way back in 1969 was this: Mick Jagger. Now, Mick Jagger, as you know, had been a bad boy of pop ever since the early 60s, and of course their infamous manager, Andrew Oldham. But what was fascinating about this was here you can see him pictured alongside his girlfriend of the moment, the beautiful Marianne Faithfull. And when he appeared here in court, he got fined £200 for drug-related offences. This, of course, simply just helped, their bad boy image, it put everything together once and for all. Now, there's been a magistrates court on this site since the 1700s. And as I said, it was kind of popular, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, simply because it was a way, particularly with celebrity court cases, of making sure that you got them there. And they didn't mind coming celebrities because they knew that the media, the press photographers, the barons of the day, would come out literally because it was, as I say, a stone's throw away from the London Palladium. In its sort of heyday, a lot of people would come from here, literally being in the public courtroom, to go around to see a matinee or an evening show at the London Palladium. That's how, powerful the place was. When John Lennon and Yoko Ono were in court here for some rather illicit drawings, she said nothing. It really created the enigma that became, of course, Yoko Ono, a little bit mysterious, a little bit Greta Garbo-esque, while John doing all the talking, and of course at this point having many years of fame, quite belligerent about exactly what he thought. This was of course the period of the famous bedding, sitting in bed, all of that sort of stuff. Nuts and madness when you think, but of course, celebrity, they love to make sure that you and I talk about them, and talk about them we did. Now, the Magistrates' Court sadly closed in 1998. A relief for many, some people might say, of course, if you're a celebrity. Now it's a luxurious hotel with over 100 plus bedrooms, a beautiful designer bar, a restaurant, and a private cinema, plus a rooftop terrace that you can look all across London. What do you think, though, if you're having dinner in the Courthouse restaurant, which you can now do? Think about this. All of those people, famous and non-famous, that have stood there pleading for their lives, pleading for their sanity, pleading for forgiveness, or perhaps lying through the skin of their teeth, making sure that they didn't get sent to one of the cells, of which still now remains inside the hotel. Either way, it's a fascinating free look into the world that went on many years before. As I said, when it first changed hands, there was a lot of things in uproar. Why are they closing it? It's still much needed. And as I've said to you before, it seems strange, doesn't it, that now we live in a world where we're closing prisons and turning them into hotels. This is the different one. We've closed a courthouse and turned it into a hotel. Either way, though, when you walk around the Marlborough Street Magistrates' Court, you can't help wondering about all the ghosts that have gone before. And as I said at the start of this video, none more famous and none more, shall we say, putting this particular courthouse on the map than none other than, of course, the raconteur and wit, Oscar Wilde. Now, I think he would have actually liked what it's now become, far more decadent to what he was used to way back in 1895. Johnny Rotten told me, by the way, that that is part of the Sex Pistols, of course, Johnny Rotten. He said that actually when they came there, they couldn't quite believe the look of how many press had turned out. And as I said, his manager, Malcolm McLaren, was absolutely thrilled. Not exactly the way you maybe should think about going to court, is it? But as ever, this is the world of celebrity. Neil Sean, Magistrates' Court, Marlborough Street, in the very heart of London.